Hello everyone, if you're new here, welcome. My name is Keisha and today I'm going to be talking about my best books of 2024. This is always one of my favorite videos to film and also one of my favorite videos to watch from other YouTubers, so I'm really excited to talk to you all about these books today. Now, I read a lot of really great books this year, so I do have a couple of honorable mentions that I want to go through before I get into my top 10. I have 8 other books that have snuck their way into my heart, so I would be remiss to not mention them today. So I'm going to go ahead and do that really quickly. So the first book was a 4-star read for me, and that is The Last Murder at the End of the World by Stuart Turton. This is a little bit of a sci-fi mystery, and I have read other books, well, one other book by this author, and I really enjoyed it, and I found that I'm really intrigued by his writing style and how he weaves a story together. I don't think this is going to be a book for everybody, but if you like trying to solve things and if you enjoy just a little bit more intelligent of writing, I think you should definitely check out Stuart Turton. The next book I want to mention is Love Walked Among Us by Paul E. Miller. This is a Christian living or Christian nonfiction book that I read with Revive Book Club earlier this year, and I got to read this with 3 of my best friends, and that made the experience even better for me. We drew a lot of really great things from this book. This is basically Learning to Love Like Jesus is the subtitle, and that's exactly what you get with this one. I just feel like this was a very meaty book. It had a lot of really great commentary and impactful moments, so I highly recommend checking this one out. The last 4-star read that I want to talk about is The Clinic by Cate Quinn, and this book kind of came out of left field for me. This was Jessie from Reading with Jess's Sleep When I'm Dead book club pick earlier this year, and I had not had this book on my radar, and I didn't really have any inclination to pick it up. However, I just had a wild hair about me and decided to pick it up. And it's one of those books that is not really something I'm used to reading. While I have read some thrillers and I do enjoy them, I don't typically gravitate towards things that are more centered around rehabilitation facilities or people that are dealing with substance abuse. I also don't really love a lot of bad language or cursing in my books, and this does have all of those things. But this story was so wild, and while it did have its slow moments, I felt myself constantly trying to figure out what was going on, being invested in these characters, even though they aren't all super likable. I was able to learn to be empathetic for people in situations like these, and I think that's always a great sign of a good book. And then the twist at the end, there's no way I could have saw that coming, and I loved it so much. So I've just not been able to stop thinking about this one, so I had to mention it. Now I have 5 5-star books that I'll really briefly go through before getting into my top 10. This one is Star Nights by Davault. It is a middle grade graphic novel with stunning art style. It is set in kind of a fantasy world. I read this author's other book, Misfit Mansion, last year, and I absolutely fell in love with it. Davault is probably my favorite graphic novelist, and so I really recommend checking this out if you enjoy graphic novels. Her art style is really colorful and vibrant, and I really enjoy the stories that she weaves together. She really puts a lot of heart into them, and I can definitely tell. So if you are looking for a good place to start or just looking for more graphic novels, this is a great one. The next 5-star read I have is Foe by Iain Reid, and I really enjoy Iain Reid's writing as well. This is another like Stuart Turton situation, except this is a 5-star author and Stuart Turton has been a 4-star author for me. But this is someone that just kind of came out of left field. I read I'm Thinking of Ending Things a few years ago, and I really enjoyed that book. And then I really enjoyed this one. Iain Reid writes kind of like psychological thrillers. He has a really fast-paced writing style, and this one is a little bit more of a sci-fi thriller. Now, I say thriller, and you may think that means there's a lot of plot and a lot of things going on, but this is more of like a slice of life type story, but it reads really quickly, and I really, really enjoyed it. The way that he writes and the little things that he puts in his stories to give little hints to the reader as to what's going on is just really intelligent, and I love it so much, so I'm definitely going to be picking more up from this author. These next 3 were all contenders for my number 10 spot in my top 10 books of the year, so please don't take this with a grain of salt when I tell you that these books are well worth picking up. The first one is Hinds Feet on High Places by Hannah Hurnard. This is a classic Christian allegory that follows our main character, Much Afraid, as she is trying to go to high places to follow the chief shepherd. She's learning to develop hinds feet. As she is on this journey, she is followed by two companions that she was initially excited about and trusted, but that she doesn't really know are the best ones for her. But as we all know, the chief shepherd knows best, and so she goes on this journey and she builds altars along the way. She dies to herself more and more and realizes how much she truly needs the shepherd and how he's always with her. I absolutely love this. Christian allegory is probably one of my favorite things to read. Little did I know, and this is one that I won't soon forget. Next, I have one that may be a little bit of a surprise to some of you who have been following me for a while, because I don't read a lot of this genre, but that is The Last Bookshop in London by Madeline Martin, and this is a World War II historical fiction novel. Now, I don't read a lot of historical fiction, but when I do, I really love it, and the ones that I tend to love are set in World War II, but primarily it's books that are about books or bookshops, librarians, things of that sort. This story really captured my heart. It follows our main character, Grace Bennett, and she has always wanted to move to London, but not under the conditions of war and what she's dealing with currently. She also never imagined that she would be working in a bookshop when she moved there. So this is a story about a woman who falls in love with working at a bookshop and falls in love with reading. She also really starts to see how books bring people together in times of strife, and that is a huge message in a lot of bookish historical fiction books like this, and I absolutely love that. I love the side characters in this story. I really fell in love with every single one of them, and I saw a lot of myself in Grace Bennett, and I say now in another life I could only hope to be her. This was just a very inspiring story, and one that I think you should check out. Whether or not you like historical fiction, I don't think that makes a difference, because even though this has some historical elements, you're more or less following the characters and how the war impacts them, and those are my favorite types of stories. And the last book that was a contender for my number 10 spot was Assistant to the Villain by Nicole Mahrer. Now, this book was one that I remember when it came out. I remember before it came out and being interested in it because it sounded a little bit different than other things that I'd heard of before. And I put it on my TBR and then quickly took it off because I realized I don't read a lot of fantasy books and I probably would never get to this one. So I took it off. I didn't anticipate reading it. And then my friend Jordan, this was her first book club pick for her Patreon. And so I was like, okay, it's time for me to give this one a go. I did, and I absolutely loved it. I won't go into too much detail with this one because I feel like this one has been around for a while, and most people generally know that it's a cozy fantasy following a girl who comes to work for a villain and falls in love with him. And that is exactly what you're going to get with this one. It has been pitched as like Ella Enchanted meets The Office, and I think that's exactly what this is. It is so incredibly good. I love the humor in this, but I'm telling you, more than anything, the characters are what makes this book. If you are in it for a good found family situation, a slow burn romance with some comical moments, and a really good twist at the end, then I think you should definitely consider checking out Assistant to the Villain. I loved it so much that I read it twice because I wasn't ready to jump into the second book just yet, since the third book doesn't come out until August. So needless to say, this one was very high up there for me this year. And now we are getting to the cream of the crop. We are getting to my top 10 favorite books that I read this year. This was incredibly difficult for me to narrow down at least the last of the top 5, but the top 5 are the ones I'm so confident about, and I'm so confident that they are in the correct spot. So just know that these last 5 are maybe interchangeable just depending on my mood, but I have had these basically in this place for a couple of months now, so I think it's safe to say this is a good list of like ranking from 10 down to 1. As a human and as a reader, I love books that can make me feel something. I love books where I can learn to empathize with people. I love books where I get to see myself in them. So all of these are like heart books for me. So also know that. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with my number 10 book. And that is The Secret Book in Scone Society by Ellery Adams. This is pitched as a cozy mystery, but I will say going into this one, you probably should know that it is a little bit more of a gritty mystery. It is a beautiful story. It's very messy and challenging, but it has a lot of heart, and it follows damaged women with a lot of trauma and the found family that they have together. And I think that's really what made this book for me. Yes, it is a cozy mystery that is set around a bookshop, but again, it's just that part of the story where you see where these women have come from, what brought them together, what makes them the way that they are, and how they all came together to solve a crime and help a friend out is so incredibly wonderful. So I highly recommend checking this one out. It was a 5-star read for me. I also got to read this with Hannah and Yvette for the Comfy Cozy Book Club, and this was Hannah's first pick, and I got to be one of her first co-hosts when she launched her book club. So it has lots of special memories tied into it as well, and the discussion that we had on this book was impeccable, so I highly recommend checking that one out. Coming in at number 9, I'm cheating just a tad bit by combining 2 books. If I had to pick, the first one would be the number 9 spot, but I feel like I have to put these together because they go together in my brain. I am not someone that reads a lot of books outside of my comfort zone. I know what I like at this point in my booktube career and in my life. So I don't typically read a lot of stories with open door scenes or spice. I don't really like a lot of cursing or like bad verbiage in my books. So it comes as a little bit of a surprise to me that I enjoy these so much, but it does impact me when I'm able to understand people and empathize with people and understand situations. And I feel like these stories did that for me. So if you haven't already been able to tell what I'm talking about, that is It Ends With Us and It Starts With Us, both by Colleen Hoover. So I read both of these books via audiobook when I first read them, and then I reread them both and tabbed them because they were that impactful for me. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about these books because I feel like most people generally know what they're about, especially since the movie came out this year, and that's really what made me intrigued to pick these up. These are not books that I would typically gravitate towards. Colleen Hoover is not typically an author that I always love. But I will say that I'm so glad that I read these books because it opened my eyes to a world that I didn't understand before. These books do not romanticize the type of romance that is in these books, but it's a really good eye into seeing and understanding what people go through that are in these types of relationships. And aside from the romance elements of the books, you get to see trauma, you get to see found family, you get to see wonderful friendships, and so much more. So don't judge a book by its cover or synopsis, just go into it. I'm so glad that I read these because one of my best friends has been through a situation similar to the one that the main character goes through in this, and I feel like now I feel more deeply towards her situation. I understand her better. I empathize with her more, and it just made me feel closer to her as a friend. So I highly recommend checking out books that you feel like can do this for you because these were such a hit for me that, again, I read them twice and tabbed them up. My number 8 spot has been filled by The Queen's Cook by Tessa Afshar. This is a biblical fiction novel that follows Roxana, who ends up coming to work in the Queen's kitchen. This does follow a timeline during Queen Esther's time in Bible times, and it is based off of scripture. I have really grown to love biblical fiction, and it is all thanks to Tessa Afshar. She does a great job of immersing the reader into the world of Bible times and helping you understand biblical history, but also just really falling in love with her characters and understanding our God and our faith more through her messages. I really feel like she does a great job of not only giving you biblical facts, but then as she weaves together a fictional story of an account of these characters' lives that may or may not have existed, or characters that did exist that these things may or may not have happened to them, she does take heart in making sure that we're always brought back to scripture. Each chapter in all the books that I've read by her start with a scripture that you can read the chapter through that lens of, and it makes me feel so much closer to the heart of God in doing that. And this book in particular was so interesting to me because she combined a lot of different genres. You have romance and mystery, you have biblical fiction, political intrigue, and you also have recipes in this one, which was really interesting. I feel like this was just very diverse and well-rounded, and I really enjoyed this story. I will say that though Tessa Afshar writes biblical fiction, just know that a lot of her plot is usually heavily based in romance, but I don't think that if you don't like romance, you won't enjoy her stories, because she just does a really good job of creating biblical men and ones that you will just fall for and ones that literally love like Jesus, and it is so incredibly refreshing to read books like that. But this one is so special to me because while it did read a little slow at times, I just felt so at peace while reading this, and I was really inspired by the story of Roxana and Aiden and just seeing how she came to know the Hebrew God through the faith of her friends and family, and how God was always there for her as she went through all these trials and traumas of her life. I also really enjoyed seeing the friendship develop between her and Queen Esther, and this is going to be the first book in the Queen Esther's Court series where Tessa writes 3 different stories of 3 different friends of Queen Esther. I'm going to go ahead and pivot into my number 7 book from this book because it is also a Tessa Afshar book, and I don't have it to hold up because my mom is borrowing it. So it is In the Field of Grace, and this one follows the story of Ruth, Naomi, and Boaz. And it is my favorite Tessa Afshar book that I've read thus far. It is just honestly like such a soul book for me. It was such a beautiful story. I absolutely love how she embellished even more on the story of Ruth and how Boaz was her kinsman redeemer, and how she opened up on how that is how Jesus is for us. That is who he is to us, and elaborated on that. She did a great job of sticking to the story in scripture from the book of Ruth, but she also gives you a story of like maybe what these characters might have been doing that we didn't see in scripture. And the way that she weaved it together to even other parts of the Bible and different characters of the Bible was so intelligent. And I just absolutely love this story so much. I cried, I laughed, I just fell in love with it, and it really drew me nearer to the Lord because I also read Ruth in the Bible a couple of times, once before reading this book and once during, and I also did Bible study on it, and I vlogged this whole experience. If you want to check it out, it is still posted on my channel. But doing all of that together really just made this book come alive, this story come alive, and really connected me with God even more. And so this just has a very special place in my heart. My number 6 spot goes to Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. I feel like this is going to be on a lot of people's top books for this year. I slept on Abby Jimenez for a little bit there, and now I really understand the hype. I have read a couple of her books. I still need to read a few more. She's not like my perfect author because, like I mentioned earlier, I do tend to like to read clean romances with no spice, no open door scenes, no language, and that is present in Abby's books, but I feel like this is the least spicy and the least language that she's had in her books. There is still some there, so just know that going in case that's something you don't like. But honestly, she weaves together such a good story of romance and then other elements. She does a really good job of bringing in contemporary life elements while not making it like too heavy on one side or another. She just does a really good job of combining those. I have read a lot of romances that do lean more on the contemporary side, and then I don't end up enjoying the romance as much, but Abby does a really good job of blending the two together. And this story in particular I really loved because she represented trauma so well with the main female lead, and then the main male guy, he was just an amazing man. I think that he did everything right by the main girl, and I definitely swooned over him. I'm not saying these people are perfect, they're definitely not, but I just thought the story was so sweet. Justin is definitely a new favorite book boyfriend of mine. Again, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail with this one because I feel like most people generally know what this book is and who Abby Jimenez is. But if you haven't picked her up, I do recommend starting with Part of Your World because this is the 3rd book in that companion series. I didn't read the 2nd one before getting to this one, but some of the characters from each of the books show up, and the way that this connected back to the other ones, I think you definitely should read them in order. Now we're to my top 5. These really are my heart books, y'all. And if you haven't already been able to tell, this has been my romance year. This has been the year where I get in touch with my younger self and I realize I've always been a hopeless romantic. I've always loved a good love story, and I finally found the authors that are going to give me that. Coming in at number 5 is My Lucky Charm by Courtney Walsh. This is the 2nd book in her Holidays with Heart series, and I am absolutely obsessed with this series in case you don't already know. It follows different characters that are all in the same family and live in the same community, and it does center around different holidays. This one centers around St. Patrick's Day, but I will say it's not so heavy that you can't read it any time of the year. This story means a lot to me because the main character really resonated with me. I felt like I saw a lot of myself in her. She's very chatty, she's very impulsive, she's a great gift giver, she is just a wonderful character, and she is very quirky and different, but I feel like I'm very quirky and different, and I love that about myself, and I love that about Eloise. So Eloise is the social media manager for the local hockey team, and this guy gets brought into the hockey team from the NHL. He's kind of been demoted, and he's a little grumpy about it, and his name is Gray, which I love because grumpy and gray just kind of go together in my head. and Eloise ends up striking up a romance with him, and it is just the cutest romance ever. I love seeing a grump be softened by a sunshine character, and that's exactly what Eloise did. This was just such a good story. I don't know how to say like anything more about it than that. I just say that Courtney Walsh writes my favorite romance just about every single time. All of her books have been 4 and 5-star reads for me, though most of them have been 5-star reads, and her books just don't hold a candle to other romances for me. So I don't know if there's anything else I can say about this one except that I loved it so much. I really resonated with the characters. I love a good fluffy rom-com, and I know a lot of people market her as someone who writes like a little bit more fluff and there's not a lot of seriousness to her books, but I do think she puts a lot of heart in her stories too, and that shouldn't be taken for granted. Just because it's not maybe as heavy as Just for the Summer doesn't mean that she doesn't deal with real life heavy topics. She just does it in a way that is a little bit more easy breezy, and sometimes we just need that because life is hard and our books don't need to be. It should come as no surprise that my number 4 pick is also Courtney Walsh, and this one is The Summer of Yes. This was such a fun story to read, and I have so many good memories around this one. I tabbed this one so much. It's a little bit different than her other stories because for me, Courtney is very well known for writing clean rom-coms, but this one is a little bit more of a contemporary fiction story or women's fiction, chick lit, if you will, and it follows our main characters, Kelsey and Georgina. And Georgina is kind of the type of character where she's a fashion mogul, and she's a little bit similar to the main character or the main woman in The Devil Wears Prada. The woman that played Meryl Streep is kind of like who I'm envisioning for her. And I think she regrets a little bit parts of her life because she was so invested in her business. And Kelsey ends up meeting her in the hospital due to some events that happen, and Kelsey is kind of on the road to becoming like Georgina, and she realizes she really just wants to do the things she's passionate about, and she challenges Georgina to go on a Summer of Yes journey where they road trip and say yes to all the things that they never did. And the story that is birthed out of that concept for this is just so incredibly amazing. And yes, there is romance in this too. Specifically, I think the romance between Georgina and Dylan is really, really sweet because Georgina just kind of forfeits family for her job, but her husband is such a great representation of Jesus and how he never gives up on us. And whenever we turn around, like when we look away, he's still always right there. He never leaves us. He never forsakes us. He loves us unconditionally. And the romance there, that was so good. But that's not even what was so good about this story. I just think Georgina's character and knowing that like old habits die hard is something that I can resonate with. And then also Kelsey's character of just like wanting to pursue her passions and her dreams and saying yes to things, but being scared to and not even realizing that that's what you're doing sometimes. It's so good. I highly recommend checking this out. If you get the opportunity to read this with friends, I also highly recommend doing that because I got to do this and have like a little book club with some of my best friends, and that made the reading experience even better. All right, we're at my number 3 now, and I'm just like steadily getting more excited to talk to you guys about these books because I really hope that this will encourage you to pick them up. My number 3 book is The Letter Tree by Rachel Fordham. This was the first book that I read this year. It was my first 5-star of the year, and I really thought it was going to be my top book of the year, but it is now at number 3, but it is still at a number 1 spot in my heart amongst a lot of other books. This is a favorite book of all time for me. It's a book that came out of left field. It's a book that I absolutely love with my whole heart. If you're looking for a good timeless romance that is set in 1920s Buffalo, New York, that features a Romeo and Juliet retelling of sorts mixed with You've Got Mail, I think that this is right up your alley. I'm not a huge historical fiction reader like I mentioned, but this is just such an incredible love story. It was beautiful and pure and clean, and there's no language in this one. It is published by Thomas Nelson, and I think it's promoted as Christian fiction, but the faith elements in this one were very, very small, so I feel like even if that's not something you're interested in, you could still really enjoy this story. It does follow two like kind of friends to lovers. It's a star-crossed lover situation where you have 2 kids that grew up together and they ended up being a part of a rival shoe company situation with their families, so now they don't talk anymore. There's also a mystery element of this story. Again, there's a You've Got Mail element where this girl leaves a letter in this hole in this tree in the Buffalo Zoo, and she goes back to get it, and when she gets there, there's a new note there. It's not the one that she left, and so she ends up having this correspondence with a guy that she doesn't realize is her childhood friend. Again, this is just a really great story. And another thing to note about this is I think when a lot of us think of 1920s New York, we think about Prohibition and things of that sort dealing with the history of this time. But this author does a good job of bringing to light things that happened in the 1920s that you might not know about, and I found that to be a really interesting element of the story too. So if you're looking for a good, clean, timeless romance set at a great backdrop in the 1920s New York with a zoo backdrop as well, which I wasn't sure about, but it was so sweet, please consider picking this one up. My top 2 books were going head to head for a minute, y'all. I'm just gonna tell you, but I'm very confident in where I put them, and I really hope that you pick both of these up. The number 2 spot for my 2024 books, my favorite books of the year, is Very Sincerely Yours by Kerry Winfrey. Kerry Winfrey is another one of my favorite authors. She writes closed-door romances, and this one was so unique, so different, so wonderful. It's a rom-com, and it has elements also of You've Got Mail. In case you can't tell, that's one of my favorite tropes apparently. But it also has a little bit of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, which you're probably like, what does that even mean? So the main character in this story, her name is Teddy. She's in her 30s, and she is currently working at a vintage toy shop, and she's kind of wondering what in the world she's doing with her life. There's also another character in this book. His name is Everett, and he is currently the local children's TV show host. Think Mr. Rogers, because he has the puppets and all the things. And the funny thing about this is that Teddy, her guilty pleasure is watching Everett's show. He ends up giving her a lot of insight into life, and she really just enjoys watching him. It's a comfort show for her. And one day she decides to write a letter to Everett like all the kids do. And little does she know, he responds. They start a correspondence, and the most beautiful, quirky love story is birthed from there. This is such a different book because it is very quirky. There's a lot of weird elements to it, but it just worked. I laughed, I cried. There's so many great things about this book, especially if you are an 80s or 90s baby. There are lots of pop culture references, which I really enjoyed. I know it doesn't always stand the test of time, but this one will for me for sure. And it also has like a Halloween party. It has karaoke, it has PJ movie nights, it has really funny family dinners. There's a really endearing 12-year-old that is the epitome of 13 going on 30, and the old lady that owns the vintage toy shop is the sweetest little grandma character, and I just love everything about this book. It's not my perfect book, but it is very nearly there. That's the only reason why it wasn't probably my number 1 spot, is because it does have a little bit of cursing, a little bit of like innuendo and stuff, because again, this is a closed door romance and not a clean one, but I mean, it's clean for the most part. It was just so good. This is one of those books that my friend Gwen always talks about, like having a 5-star feeling. The whole way through this book, I had a 5-star feeling. I just knew that this was going to be a new favorite book of all time. So if you are looking for just like a giddy good time, I highly recommend checking out this book. And we are finally at my top book of the year. If you don't know what it is by now, you are clearly new on my channel, and that is okay. I'm so glad you're here, but you're going to learn a lot about me if you haven't already. My top book, if you haven't guessed, you should guess in the comments, because I feel like most of you probably know what it is. But if you don't, it is My Phony Valentine by Courtney Walsh. Again, Courtney Walsh has become my favorite romance author. She writes sweet, clean romances or rom-coms. This is a rom-com in particular, and I just absolutely love the stories that she weaves. She does a great job of weaving in second chances and forgiveness and grace into her stories, while also giving you just a fun, really good time. This one in particular is set in Loveland in a small town community, and it follows our main character, Poppy Hart, who is a local restaurant owner and chef, but her business is struggling a little bit. She's at her local coffee shop getting a coffee, and this girl from high school that was like a mean girl comes into the situation. She's talking to her, and she's like, oh, do you not have a boyfriend, and all of this stuff. And about the same time, Poppy bumps into the guy in front of her, who just so happens to be hockey's hottest bad boy, Dallas Burke, and he swoops in to save the day by pretending to be her fake boyfriend. But it doesn't stop there. The community kind of catches wind that these two were seen together and starts speculating if there is a romance or not. Dallas's manager catches wind of this, as well as his sweet meddling grandmother, whom I love so much. Give me a story with a meddling grandma any day, and I'm going to eat it up. They decide that it would be good for the two of them to continue to fake date, because the manager thinks this will help Dallas's hockey career by kind of showing a softer side to him, since he is right now known as kind of the bad boy. And then they think it will also help Poppy's business by having a celebrity romance. So they end up agreeing to this, but of course they're going to fall in love anyways. And I just loved this story. From beginning to end, I ate this up. I really took my time with this one and I loved every single second of it. It's so quotable. It's so cute. Their meet cute immediately made me laugh. Like literally, I think maybe 8 pages into this one, I was rolling on the floor laughing, like almost seriously rolling on the floor laughing. And also, if you're a fan of grand gestures, the grand gesture that happens in this is one of my favorites that I've ever read, and I wish I had like a visual of it. This needs to be turned into a Hallmark movie like yesterday. It was so stinking good. And even though I know I said with the other book in this series, which I mentioned was my number 5 book, that's My Lucky Charm, I did say I related a lot with this character, and I do feel like she's the most relatable of all the characters that I've read in Courtney's books. But I also related with Poppy's character. That's the thing about Courtney's books is I'm going to relate every single time. I think she's just like my soul author. There's so many things that I relate with in her characters and her messages and in all the things. And if you haven't picked up a Courtney Walsh via my recommendation yet, please do. And please let it be this one, because this is my all-time favorite of hers and one of my all-time favorite books, and clearly my top book of 2024. And there you have it. Those are my top 10 books of 2024. Each of them have such a special place in my heart, and I really and truly hope that some of you will consider picking some of them up if you haven't already. I love them so much. I have such big feelings around them, and I'm so glad that I got to read them this year. If you've made it this far in the video, I would love to know what your favorite book of 2024 is, or if you want to let me know that you have a video like this on your channel, I would love to watch, so let me know. But thank you all so much for watching today. I'm so excited to see more people's best books. I hope you enjoyed learning mine, and I hope you discovered some books that could potentially be new favorites for you next year. Thank you all so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Bye, friends.